Okay, perfect. Okay, excellent. Let's make a start. So yeah, as I said, thank you so much for joining me this morning. I think this is incredibly topical at the moment. It certainly seems to be for a lot of our clients, probably for good reason. Skills and capabilities and businesses are being disrupted quite a lot. And a lot of that calls for thinking about where future leaders are going to come from, how do we get the business ready, and what that talent landscape is going to look like. And for me, it's quite refreshing, actually, because I don't know about you, but over the years, I've been in this world for 20 years now, but succession planning always seemed to be the thing that got neglected. And it was never really given the energy or the time or the importance that everything else got. And I genuinely think, if companies value their future and value the talent, this process is almost the most important in that life cycle of talent management. So I'm definitely glad that it's getting the spotlight that it's getting. And thank you to all of you as well this morning for joining and coming into this conversation. It just shows to me that also this is important, obviously for the world. Perfect. Oh, can I just check why there's sound? Ralph, I don't know if you're in the background. If you can just check why there's other sounds coming through, that would be great. But anyway, so if you are new to the world of LTT, I thought I'd just do a little quick intro. So ultimately, we help organizations keep and grow brilliant people. It doesn't get any more complex than that. And we do that in lots of different ways, whether we're talking about careers and performance, change and transformation, leadership and management development, team performance. There's lots of different ways that we help organizations to do this. If you've not been on one of my webinars before, I can see a couple of familiar names, but if you don't know me, my name's Yvette. I'm one of the senior consultants for LTT. And as I said, my background is 20 years people and culture. I've worked in small, medium, FTSE businesses. And the last 3 years, I've been part of the LTT family. So it's really great to see you. I'm going to be sharing with you lots of resources and downloadables at the end, which will hopefully help you on this journey of your own succession planning in your business as well. So you'll come away with lots of great tools and tips and things that you can do. So this morning is a bit more conversational. I want to show to you how we approach succession planning, how we've done this for our clients, but also if you were doing this year for your own business, how to approach that. So first of all, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page when we're talking about what succession planning actually is. And if this is part of your people strategy for this year, I'm going to show you how you can build the business case for it and what you need to consider when you're going to your C-suite or your senior stakeholders to get their buy-in to support this process. So we're going to talk about your talent story, figuring out what that exam question is, and how you make sure that this is effective at all levels. And then I'm going to show you a little bit of a high-level view of what that process could look like, whether you're delivering it in-house, whether you bring someone like us in to help you with it. So I'm going to show you what that journey could look like. And then I'm going to share with you, as I said, lots of really useful resources and things that you can take away today. So before we get started, I kind of want to hear from you just to see where everyone is on this journey. If you look at the context of your business right now, whether you've done succession planning for a while, whether this is just an opportunity to refresh the approach, or whether you're starting from scratch, what do you think are the biggest barriers for succession planning in your business right now? So just in the chat, if you can give me a couple of ideas of what you're facing into. Oh, Veronique, how can I mute myself? Ralph, that's a good question. I don't think I've ever seen that as a receiver. I'll ask Ralph to check for you, Veronique. Nikki, yeah, lack of time and resource. Absolutely, Stephanie, focus on the today rather than the tomorrow. There's so much going on in businesses right now. Thinking about the future can seem like such a big, daunting task. Absolutely. Jenny, not having the clarity in what the next roles involve. Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to look at that. Actually, it's one of the slides. We're going to look at what those declining roles might be in your organization. Yeah, Liz, that's so true. I've actually got a client like that at the moment. It is really, really interesting. Even they're a tech startup, and even to get the CEO and the COO into this conversation has been somewhat of a challenge because of the size of the business and not really seeing the criticality, I think, of it right now. So yeah, definitely know where you're coming from. Skills gaps. Oh, Kelly, I can't see the comments. I'm showing as private. Oh, Helen, lack of interest, knowledge. Okay, Ralph, can we just pause for just a quick second? Because I just want to make sure people aren't missing out on some of the conversations. In your kind of chat bar, everyone, do you have something at the top that sort of has a little toggle where you can choose public, private, disabled, or does anyone? Okay, perfect. Chat is now public. Okay, amazing. Great. Don't you just love tech? Okay, amazing. Perfect. I think everything that you have just said, and actually, Sam, I like the word that you've just used there. Sometimes these are perceived challenges. Quite often it's because there's not a clear definition of what succession looks and feels like in an organization. So of course, the usual suspects, cost, time, lack of resource will come up. Oh, Letitia, you don't have audio. Okay. Is anyone else struggling with audio? Okay, perfect. Letitia, it might be, if you don't mind just going out and coming back in and see if that's solving the issue for you. Apologies everyone for the tech challenges. Yeah, absolutely. Annabelle, I agree with you. Managers not understanding the process. It's really interesting. A previous business I worked in, I mean, we were huge, we were 100,000 people globally. That was probably one of our biggest barriers to succession planning. I mean, we had everything right. We had the manager guides, we had the tools, we had the processes. It was very slick, but it was very much treated like a tick box exercise. I don't think managers really understood the value, the importance, what this could help them with in the future. So absolutely, I think everything that you've just said is absolutely right, and hopefully some of what I'm going to share this morning is going to help you on this journey. But first of all, I think it's important that we just all align on what succession planning actually is. Now, very, very simply, when we talk about succession planning, and you'll see this in the white paper, in everything that we do around this, it's always the question of, do you have the right people in the right places with the right skills doing the right thing? How many times have I've seen it, I'm sure you have as well, seen people in organizations, in roles where they're really, really struggling, and all of a sudden they get an opportunity elsewhere in the business and they absolutely flourish. How often does that happen? So we have the right people. There are plenty of capable, competent, very driven people in your organization. They have the right skills, but sometimes they're doing the wrong jobs. Now, this happens for a multitude of reasons. It could be because we rushed the hiring process and we were just looking at, filling a bum on seat, and we didn't really think about the wider person, the wider role, what's expected. Sometimes it just unfortunately also happens that people end up just naturally evolving into roles that are potentially not fit for them. So it's worth thinking about, if you look at your people landscape right now, where are you seeing some of these signs? Sometimes it's hidden under the phrase, oh, that person's just underperforming, and we're kind of relying on the managers to give us a lot of that information. But actually, if we really strip that back, is the person underperforming, or are they just in the wrong place in the organization. So this for me is a really simple, whenever I talk about succession planning in organizations, this is almost the first slide that I shared, just so that everyone can understand. It's not just about a role, and it's not just about the person, it's about the whole ecosystem around that. So why is succession planning important? As I said, I'm super happy that it's getting the airtime it deserves, because ultimately it starts and ends with the business need. So we're always thinking about succession planning in terms of how we're supporting the business, how we're improving the business, or how we're building the business for the future. Now, when we do that really, really well, we achieve two things, right? So one, we ultimately de-risk the business, because we all know that talent is a very risky business to be in at the moment. It's tough to find good talent. It's certainly challenging to keep good talent. So all of this is about de-risking the business. If we can do that, we ultimately accelerate the delivery of the business plan, because we are making sure we've got the right people with the right skills doing the right things at the right time. So ultimately, succession planning is more than just the here and now. It's a really good process and opportunity for you to understand your talent landscape. But what you're really doing with this is planning for the future, right? And you're also thinking about how you're supporting the development planning for your high potential employees. And that's quite an important point there. Because even if you had to look at, let's just say, your 2025 L&D investment, right? And where you invested in programs or coaching or whatever it might be, can you very concretely point to the investment for your high potentials and what return you received on that? Have people moved into those roles? Where have they sat in the succession planning process? So the more robust your succession planning is, the more robust your development investment will be. And in turn, that helps you with your business case back to the business for budgets and things like that. Ultimately, succession planning also, to some extent, not 100%, but helps you to de-risk losing your top talent. Again, we believe that you only borrow people for the amount of time that they choose to work for you. So at some point, of course, even your most talented people will leave, and that's great for them, and they can realize their own potential. But you want to, as much as you can, show to them that there is an opportunity here, right? You want to show to them the art of the possible. So that's also where you start talking about your career pathways and all of the ways in which they can develop and grow. So it really helps to de-risk. It doesn't remove the risk, but it certainly lessens it. And then obviously, we want to keep and grow brilliant people, right? You've got a lot of capable, competent, skilled people in your business. You want to keep and grow them, because if you can do that, you also start to think about succession planning across the business. So again, another pitfall that I've seen whenever I've run succession planning programs and processes is that usually leaders and managers just sort of think of their vertical. Has anyone else kind of come across that right now? When we're doing succession planning, the manager is sort of we're just focusing on, who's in our immediate view, and we're not sort of looking across the business. Has anyone else seen that? Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting. In my previous business, we you're gonna laugh, but we took the 9 box and we changed it into a version of a 6 box. It still wasn't great, but we'll go with it. And what I found actually in that process is that we actually ended up with divisions and teams hoarding talent, because they were so focused on keeping the people that they had. So for them, the whole concept of looking beyond their own divisions and functions was it was a bit sort of a no-go area. People didn't want to look at other people's talent because it was very, very political. So again, it's helping managers and leaders to understand that if we don't do that, if we don't increase the mobility across the organization, ultimately we're putting the business at risk. Not even just the talent, but the business as a whole. So for me, whenever I've used the language of de-risk the business, accelerate the delivery, when I'm kind of talking to the business, it always lands, because it's their language, right? They understand what that means. So we know it's important. So when we look at succession planning, it's really important that we focus on the potential of someone. So again, if you've been in the LTT world a little while, you will know that we always say that everyone has potential, right? Potential is not a yes/no question. The question you should be asking is the potential for what? So again, if we go back to that earlier slide of what is succession planning, do you have the right people in the right places with the right skills doing the right thing? That's when you start to think about the potential of someone. Now, I want to do a bit of a side call out on this because, again, and I don't know if you're seeing this right now, often when we're talking about succession planning and we're running those processes, the conversation somehow seems to end up about performance. Now, it's really important that, however you've designed your succession planning process, your manager guides, whatever that looks like for you, that there is very clear guidance between how you assess and measure performance and how you look at potential. Because in succession planning, the focus should always be on the potential, right? Because that is the only thing really that will tell you whether someone can stretch and can be successful in future roles. So it gives you a much longer term view of capability of a particular person. Performance is a very here and now moment in time, right? So it's how someone's performing today. Now, of course, that's important because you also want someone who can demonstrate that they can, step up to the challenge, they can perform under pressure, they've got the grit, they've got the resilience, they've got those behaviors that we need. But ultimately, potential is the thing you really want to test in organizations. And that's what managers want to test in their teams, right? You want to see how someone shows up when you give them a little bit of stretch. So you want to think about what are your potential indicators within your succession planning process, because we know the research says that only 29% of those people in your organization who you would class as high performers are actually high potential. So that's a very, very small number of people. So the way to think about this then is to go and focus on the role. Now, again, when I've been involved in succession planning processes, we often ended up in rooms talking about people. We talked about the person in the role and not the role itself. So when you're thinking about potential, you want to focus on the role, right? And thinking about the role in terms of, no, Iona, that's a really interesting call out. I actually, when I was putting the slides together, because there's, you're right. I used this 10 years ago, and there hasn't been a change. I haven't seen any new refreshed research. But if anyone else has, please do let me know, because I'd be very keen to see it. I haven't found another credible resource where those figures had significantly changed, but it's a good question. Thank you. So yeah, we want to be thinking about the role, right? So there's two things we want to look at. You want to look at the value that the role adds to the business. So that could be money, it could be engagement, it could be overall sales, growth, whatever that might be. And then the other side is the complexity of that role. Is this a skill you need to buy in or can buy in, or is it too complex? Is it too nuanced? Is there too much of our language, our ways of working? Is it a role that we have created and doesn't necessarily exist like for like in the wider talent marketplace? So those are the two things you want to look at when you're looking at potential, is what value does the role add to the business, and then the complexity of that particular skill. So earlier I talked about, the different types of roles and how you could look at this in terms of succession planning. So everyone really in an organization have 4 different types of roles that sit across the business. So you all have pivotal roles, right? These are roles that are required to meet any sort of new emerging challenges. They have the potential to make a almost disproportionately large impact but also deliver a real gear shift in terms of performance. So you're going to be probably thinking about a role in your business right now that you think is absolutely pivotal. So those are probably the roles that I would start with in terms of succession planning, because something could go seriously wrong if we suddenly ended up with no talent backup, emergency successor, whatever it might be in those roles. Operationally critical roles are those that are core to delivery of the business strategy and the plans. So a lot of that, you'll probably be looking at some of your functional roles could sit within that, or, core business critical roles. Pivotal, usually I see as very senior, maybe even C-suite, very kind of often also client or customer or stakeholder focused type roles. Operationally critical is that, the roles that actually help to deliver that strategy and the plan. So as I said, your functional roles could sit within that. Now, the sustaining roles, the emphasis here is, what are those roles in your business that help you to sustain and continuously improve performance? Now, you might only have a handful of those roles. Quite often, what I've seen in a lot of succession planning processes is that operationally critical and sustaining tend to fall into one bucket. And it really depends on how you define the different types of roles in your business. There's nothing wrong with combining those two. It depends how big you are, how complex your structure is, and what your target operating model looks like as well. Now, for me, the really interesting thing, and where I often don't see a lot of business spending time talking about, is the declining roles. So these are those roles where either the responsibilities, the skills, the resources will decline over time. Now, it's interesting, one of my clients I have right now, we were doing a bit of sort of structural mapping for them, because they're going through quite a bit of change. And we came across a role that the job description for that role, and I'm not kidding, hasn't changed for the last 20 years. The role has evolved and things have changed, but roughly the person is still doing the same thing, or the job is still doing the same thing. And when we actually looked at, again, the value that role adds to the overall business and the complexity of it, it was very, very minimal. So what they hadn't actually identified is that role in the context of their structure and what they're trying to achieve in the next 5 years is actually no longer needed. The role, the responsibility can be absorbed, and not necessarily in terms of doing more work, but it can be done differently and done better. Now, the person in that role is absolutely fantastic and has lots of really strong skills, and we can definitely reposition them into a different team, but the role itself is no longer needed. So has anyone identified any declining roles in their businesses right now? And I definitely think that the whole conversation of AI is coming into this. There's definitely going to have to be roles in organizations that either need to change, adapt, or will completely decline as a result of that. But has anyone started to see that in their own businesses? Yeah, Kelly, you're absolutely right. I actually was on a webinar not too long ago, and it was, if I remember correctly, it was Go Cardless was the company. They had developed such a strong internal AI kind of platform and chatbot that it almost halved their sort of back office operations team. In terms of like just those day-to-day questions, what's my pay grade, what's my job description, it completely changed the landscape. Yeah, order processing, product expiration, yeah, I know. I actually saw a really very interesting debate about the whole reduction in entry-level roles and admin, because of the whole, AI can do some of these things. There's a bit of a risk there. It was an interesting conversation I was part of yesterday, and it was saying that businesses are playing a bit of a risky game by not bringing in entry talent, but that's a whole conversation in itself. Yeah, absolutely. I think every business in some way, shape, or form will have a declining role, and it's just figuring out what that role is for you. Now, it doesn't mean the people in those roles are not talented or not skilled, but you have to think about where else could you now position them within the organization, because again, you might have um, very capable, skilled, and driven people in those roles, and we certainly don't want to lose them. We want to think about how we can develop them. So again, usually what we see in organizations is obviously the 9 box, and if anyone has ever talked to Jo about the 9 box, you will know how passionate she is about not using it. And I completely agree. I've seen it used in varying ways. I've seen it being adapted. As I said, we took the 9 box in a previous company and we turned it into a 6 box, and it still wasn't useful. It didn't drive any meaningful debate. The quality of the conversation wasn't good. People weren't putting people in the right boxes. So it kind of rendered the whole process and conversation a little bit irrelevant, if you ask me. So we have a much simpler view of how you would position your people when you're thinking about succession planning. So a lot of the time when we think about succession planning, we think about the future leaders. But again, we know from that earlier stat, only 29% of your high performers will fall into high potential, and that's probably where your future leaders will come from. Most of your people will sit in what we call the talented many box. Now, increasingly, we also need to think about, you've got people in your business who we would call highly regarded specialists, right? So where potentially replacing them is either incredibly expensive, it maybe even takes years to develop that skill set internally and get people ready, or it's just really, really challenging to find those people in the market. So they also need to really have a very clear strategy around their successes. Especially if it's a very tough skill set or a demanding skill set and it's a very rare one in the market. How are we planning to develop those people right now within the business? So this is usually when we think about succession planning, how we look at it, because each of these buckets will have very different development strategies, retention strategies, and everything else that sits around that. So it's really important that we, first of all, think about the roles and think about those 4 categories, and can you identify where your different roles sit within that? And then secondly, when you look at the people, where would they sit within this model, and what would your development and your retention strategy be as a result of it? Okay, perfect. So let's just assume we're ready to now start doing this, and it's part of your strategy for this year, and we now need to get that buy-in, that sponsorship from the senior stakeholders. It's really important that we are clear on why we're doing it now. Why is it suddenly so important for you? What has changed? What has shifted? What are you trying to achieve? So it's that exam question. Now, once you have that exam question, then you have to start developing your talent story. Now, first of all, you've got to create a common language around this. So what is your definition of talent within the business? So if you're going to launch succession planning, what's the story that you need to lead the business through? So for example, when we're talking about potential, we often talk about 5 core behaviors that we're looking for. So we're looking for courage, we're looking for impact, insight, drive, and curiosity. So those are our 5 factors of potential that we usually use when we're developing succession planning. So what is your version of that? How would you test someone's potential? Secondly, you've got to encourage everyone to be a high performer, right? And to think about, how do you start developing and testing for that potential, because you might not have a clear view right now about who your high performers are versus your high pose, but also where's that kind of 29% of people who are both, right? So how can you encourage people to do that? What kind of system and structure do you need to place around people so that they are able to achieve that? Then you've got to think about the process. The more complex, the more lengthy, the more laborious it is, the less people will engage with it, especially your managers. So you've got to think about a really simple objective that will drive really great talent conversations. When you sit in that room, it needs to feel like we're genuinely talking about the talent within our business, and this doesn't just feel like a tick box exercise. And then, of course, we've got to provide coaching and support and development to the managers and the leaders who ultimately drive this process. They are the ones that spend most of their days working with their people, right? So they are closer to the people than perhaps what you are. So they are. It's easier for them to spot that potential, to coach it, to develop it, to grow it. So how do we make sure leaders and managers also have the right tools to be able to do this? And then we've got to think about succession planning doesn't just sit on its own as a work stream, right? It forms part of your wider people strategy. So how have you connected it? If you've got a new succession planning process in place, how has that connected back to your performance process? And then perhaps your pay and reward and retention strategies. So it all sits very seamlessly together. So that's the first thing. You've got to develop that story. Now, to give you just a bit of an example of why these things could be important to you right now, it could be that your operating model has changed, right? Again, we've seen that quite a bit recently because of the world is changing, the way we're working is changing. The structures that we had 5 years ago perhaps aren't fit for what we need now, but certainly also not for where we're going in the future. So it could be that your operating model change, so you've got a different set of talent requirements. So that could be one thing that's driving your succession planning process. It could be just that you've got to create a greater talent pipeline within your line management. So you've got to create that capability and that skill set far earlier. So that could be something else that's driving your succession planning process. But it could also be that you're seeing a really tough market in terms of talent. Perhaps you're not always finding the right people who can join the business. So, the best thing to do is to obviously find opportunities for people internally. So showing them the art of the possible and creating that mobility. Definitely great for retention. So you're not losing really, really good people. And also people feel really fulfilled then in their careers, right? They feel like they're growing, they feel like they're developing. So that could be also an example of why succession planning is important for you right now. Now, secondly, we need to make sure that this is effective at all levels, right? Because we've got to make sure that from an individual's perspective, if we have identified them as part of a succession pipeline, do they know it? I've always found it fascinating when succession planning has happened in secret and no one knows that there are high potential. I think if you want me to really drive and own my development, I've got to know that I am in some shape or form part of that high potential journey and that I've been identified as that, right? So I've got to make sure that I take also the ownership within that and that I understand that so much of my career sits with me. But certainly from a business perspective, whatever you're doing around succession planning, it's got to connect back to the business strategy, right? We've got to see a clear link around why we're doing this right now and what it's going to help us achieve in terms of that business strategy journey. And then, of course, within the functions, we've got to make sure that people are spending time with their development plans, focusing on their growth. We're thinking about the experience, the expertise, and the exposure that people might need that can help test some of that potential and get them ready for whatever role that they are in succession for. So we've got to think about how we make sure that everything is in place to support that succession at every level within the business. So if you think about what good looks like, then I think first of all, for me, the pitfall I've seen in succession planning is that we don't have clear data. There isn't a clear narrative around what we need versus what we've got. Of course, you've got to understand your current talent landscape if you want to understand where you need to go and what you need to have for the future. So part of this is also about giving leaders the confidence so that they can also build the depth and the breadth of their succession within either their functions or wider within the business. So this could be, something like a talent dashboard. That's something that I remember I used about 3.5 years ago. We built it all in Power BI, and every leader had a very clear succession dashboard that showed them exactly where their high potentials were, what their development plans are. So they had a very easy view of what the data was saying about their talent. And then we also had one level higher. So we had a board report that went out every quarter to showcase how the talent landscape has changed. Where are we at risk? Where are people potentially moving? Where are they leaving? It also included things like our age demographic within the business, because that was quite a big problem for us as well. So you've got to, first of all, make sure you've got the data and the insights so that, again, leaders know what they're working with and what they need to do. And then, of course, we need to think about what we're doing with the data, right? So where are we investing in terms of development? How are we tracking this? Do we see mobility? How have we tested some of our successes? Have we given them the opportunity to stretch? How have we tested some of that potential? So again, all of the data and the insights that we have in that left column will again help us to de-risk the business and ultimately accelerate the delivery. But again, it's all coming back to the business strategy. There's got to be a clear link around your succession planning process and what you're trying to achieve. Natalie, what would you include and measure on a talent dashboard? So when we did this, each leader had their own talent dashboard. So I'll just caveat this with saying, in the background, we had, as a talent management function, an overview of all of the talent across all of the divisions. So when we were looking at wider mobility, we could do that from our side. But just for each leader's access, we gave them a dashboard that just included their own functions or divisions, depending on who we were talking about. But within that, we showcased, and remember, I'm going to say this, we used the 6 box. So we showcased where everyone sat within the 6 box. We demonstrated, or for each person, you then would click into them and they had a profile. Their potential descriptors, their development plans. We had where they are in terms of the succession planning. So for example, are they an emergency successor? Are they ready now, ready next, ready future? And what does that look like? We had what are the development gaps? It was a very simple kind of almost one-pager dashboard that would tell that leader everything they needed to know about that person in terms of their kind of succession journey. If you were completely discounting the kind of 9 box, 6 box, whatever you want to call it, I would simply give a leader a view around everyone who's currently classed as a high potential within their division. And again, you might want to go back to your potential factors and how you define that. You'd probably want to showcase what is the risk to the business. So that particular role, if we lost someone in that role right now, is the risk high, medium, low, and why that is. And then you want to showcase who the successes are for that role as well. So you're kind of thinking probably CEO -2 levels here. So you're always thinking there needs to be 2 layers of depth to your succession planning. So that's how we did it. But I think there's lots of different ways. It depends how much data you have, how deep your data goes, how connected it is with your learning and development, your career conversations, all of those things. But that's usually how I would or how I showcased it in the past. I'll pick up your question in a moment, Veronica. I'm just a bit conscious of time. So I think really importantly, again, something that I've seen and I've struggled with in the past is what does it mean for the business? Succession planning doesn't have to be this huge undertaking, but again, people will say, well, it's extra time. I've now got to do this extra process. So you've got to be very clear on what this means for the business. What do I get out of it for completing this process, and what's required for me to get there? So you've got to think about the future leaders, what the business is needing right now, where the business strategy is going, what gaps are there. There needs to be a clear map of both your future and your current skills and behaviors that you have. You've got to think about, can we provide a clear view of what roles we need to deliver the new operating model, for example. So again, for me, this comes back to that, what's the talent story that you've created? Does everyone understand why talent is so important? So I wanted to quickly share with you just a simple view of how you could run this process. It doesn't have to be a process that takes forever or huge chunks of time. Typically, we've seen a lot of our clients who've managed to streamline the process into a sort of 8 to 12 week window. And that's everything from the setup, making sure that everyone understands the story, everyone's got the access to guides and training and everything that they need, to actually having the action plan at the end. So of course, this is just, it's not a one and done process. I think any great succession planning process will always allow room for ongoing conversations, because we know that talent is fluid and people move and things change. So you've got to build that into it. But you can run all of this on your own. You can bring in an external consultancy to do it all for you, or you can do something in the middle. I don't think there's a right or a wrong way here, but really what we're seeing is sort of three buckets. You've got to think about, how do you prepare the business for this? So do you have everything in place? The guides, the process, the templates. If you're using a system, what does that look like? Then we're going through the launch, where we're starting to capture the data. We're getting the business to engage with this. And then probably the biggest chunk of time in this process is that sort of analysis, the insights, and where we're starting to do our calibrations, and maybe we're feeding it into board reports, whatever that looks like. So there's lots of different ways that you can do this, and it's thinking about what would work for you and how do you get the business to engage early with all of this. So I've talked a lot about some of the common challenges. I think for me, the biggest one that I've always seen consistently come up is this confusion between performance and potential. And quite often it's because businesses haven't defined what potential looks and feels like for them, and how do you actually measure that as well. So as I said, you can bring us in at lots of different points if you needed to. We recently worked with a Premier League football club they sort of wanted to move away from the traditional 9-box grid and wanted to create a bit more of a fluid experience. And they were specifically looking at CEO -2. And for them, it was to spot high potential talent that specifically fitted into that future leader category. So it was a very fluid process, and we did it as a combination. So we worked in tandem with their team to do it. So they didn't outsource the whole thing. And we had a really great process and lots of really great comments and engagement from them, which you can read later when you see it. I personally was involved in this particular project with the CITB. They used the 9-box grid, and what they brought us in to do was to actually develop all of the collateral around all of this. So clear manager guides, the language, the story, and putting all of that into a bit of a companion guide, but also an executive summary deck that went out to all of the leaders. So there's lots of different ways that you can cut this, depending on the complexity of what you're trying to achieve and how you're looking to achieve that as well, timescales, and all of those things. So just to close, if you remember nothing else from today, I think for me, the most effective succession planning processes are simple. They connect back to the business strategy, so it's very easy for leaders to buy in and they understand why it's important. Good succession planning drives the quality of the debate. And we've got to be clear on that story. What's in it for me? Why should I engage with all of this? Thank you, Elaine. Yes, you'll receive everything. So a lot of what I've talked about today, you can find in our succession planning white paper. It tells you exactly how we approach it. It has the model that I showed earlier with the 3 squares in there. So there's lots of really great insights and resources that you can get from the white paper. Now, beyond that, we also have an entire section on the website that is filled with resources from whether it's videos, other webinars we've done in the past, blogs. Again, lots of our thought leadership, our approach, our design is in these resources. So feel free to go and click around and explore. And of course, next webinar, if you're around on the 2nd of April, you don't want to miss this one. It's with Jo, and she's in particular going to talk about how to run a culture audit. So again, if that's something that's on the strategy for this year, make sure you join Jo for that conversation. And then last but not least, something a little bit new for our community. If you've been with us for a while, you know that we absolutely value the people that are in our world. You know, we learn so much from you. And obviously, you know, we always share our expertise and insights. So we've set up a specific community space for this, where you can join us in the conversation. I promise you, it's not spam. We only share all of the best stuff. You'll get first access to everything that we are releasing. So a lot of, I don't know if you've recently seen, our white papers are being renewed and refreshed. So you'll get first view of all of this. So if you want to be part of that conversation, please come and join us. You'll be in great company with lots of other really great senior HR, L&D, and people, professionals. So please feel free to come and join us. Thank you so much. Veronique, I will come back to you on your question because I've just seen that in the chat. Thank you for spending the time with me. Apologies for running 3 minutes over. I appreciate you for bearing with me, but enjoy the rest of your week and hope to see you on future sessions. Thank you, everyone.